Today in the EU, why Michel Barnier's young government might fall. The current French government might be the shortest lived in the history of the Fifth Republic. Yesterday, the Prime Minister forced through the National Assembly a social security bill, and both the left-wing coalition and far-right party confirmed they would trigger a vote of no confidence. But why are budget talks threatening a political crisis in France?
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. So I'm here in Paris with Thèo Bourgery-Gonse,
Hi, Giada.
political reporter at Euractiv. We're walking towards the Assemblée Nationale.
Yeah.
It's 1:56, so 1 hour to go before a very delicate moment.
Indeed it is. Sorry, what? It is.
We just got to the Assemblée Nationale. It's packed with journalists discussing whether or not there will be a vote of no confidence. Everybody's on their phones. Everyone seems to be holding their breath.
Bonjour à tous, la séance est ouverte.
Sur le fondement de l'article 49, alinéa 3 de la Constitution, j'engage la responsabilité du gouvernement, de mon gouvernement, sur l'ensemble du projet de loi de financement de la sécurité sociale pour 2025.
The session just finished. Michel Barnier, in the end, did use the constitutional trick you had talked about.
Yeah.
I guess we were right. So what happens now?
Yeah, so this has been long in the making, and for weeks we've been talking about the possibility for the government to use this constitutional trick, if you call it such. That's known as the 49.3. And under this constitutional tool, the Social Security budget bill is adopted without a vote.
Yeah.
But there is now the possibility for opposition MPs to file a vote of no confidence.
Okay, well, let's go get some comments from MPs.
C'est encore un 49.3, donc d'abord Michel Barnier qui avait dit qu'il voulait faire différemment.
Well, it's yet again another use of Article 49.3. After Barnier said he'd do things differently, we see that he's pushing through while we, the New Popular Front, had passed some measures in the Social Security bill to find extra billions to reduce the Social Security deficit. So the Prime Minister is triggering Article 49.3. The Rassemblement National said they'll vote the motion of no confidence, so this government is dead in the water. What matters is that democracy prevails and that Macron does what he should have done in July, that is to name Lucie Castex as Prime Minister.
So we're back to the studio, me and Thèo, to add context around the latest developments. So this all starts with France having the highest deficit in the European Union, but for Romania, Michel Barnier, the French Prime Minister, has presented a plan to reduce this deficit by next year, as asked by Brussels. But there are parts of this budget draft that have encountered fierce opposition. Now, why is that?
Essentially, there was heavy criticism that the new budget, as drafted by the government, would include a new tax hike on electricity prices, that the Social Security budget file would increase the number of drugs that don't get government subsidy when you buy them, and a lot of opposition felt that this was unfair to the working class. There was also a big conversation over the extent to which employers who employ people at low wages could get contribution exemptions, and the government wanted to do away with some of that just to save some money and some cash, but ultimately that was pushed back and seen as a way to slow growth and employment. So there are a number of key demands and key policy chapters within that budget that oppositions were willing to fight tooth and nail against.
And yet, the past 2 months of negotiations have yielded results. Barnier has made concessions to the Rassemblement National, the far-right party, including a last one the day of the vote. And he did say right after that, well, this vote is a matter of responsibility. So what do you make of his strategy?
The way we can see Barnier's decision to give in to some of the Rassemblement National's key red lines is too little, too late. Most of the key changes that the Rassemblement National was asking for happened last week all the way up, as you said, to earlier today. That seemed to be too little in light of everything that the far right was asking for. And then there are a number of also other considerations that the far right wanted, which I guess questioned as a whole the purpose and the direction that the budget would take. For example, they called on the government to do more to cut back on emergency medical help for migrants, which the far right claims costs way too much for public finances and stops native French people, if I can call them that, from getting proper treatment. That's proven to be not exactly right, but they've pushed to cut back on that. And then they also wanted the French government to cut back on the contribution of France to the European budget. So we were looking at radically different approach and philosophy to the budget, and that's something that I think Michel Barnier couldn't necessarily give in on.
And we also have to consider that it's nearly Christmas. The French government now has less than 30 days to figure out its budgetary measures for 2025. So why are parties announcing a vote of no confidence now?
I mean, the vote of no confidence is a political signaling, and the argument from the far right, but also from the left, is that the budget as it is austerity oriented, and it doesn't meet the demands and the needs of the working class, and that therefore the government, so the opposition goes, is no longer fit to run the country. So I think everyone in the National Assembly is aware that a budget is needed, but the direction that it takes is the crux of the issue here. And with the social security budget being pushed through without a vote, and a vote of no confidence being filed in the next few minutes, and that the vote should be taking place on Wednesday or Thursday, that's going to be strong political signaling as to where the country is going to go and the extent to which that influences budget, but also a number of other policy areas, especially if the government is toppled and the prime minister is due to resign.
And does the Rassemblement National have the numbers to pass a vote of no confidence?
No, not on their own. So the way it would work is the left coalition has said time and time again that they would use the budget and negotiations over the budget to try to topple the government, but they themselves didn't have the numbers. For the first time, the far right has said that it would join forces with the left in voting a common vote of no confidence, and that gives them the necessary votes for the vote of no confidence to pass, and that's an absolute majority in the lower chamber, so that's 289 votes.
I mean, according to several MPs that we've heard today, going ahead with the dissolution of the government means institutionalizing chaos. What do you make of this statement? How true is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the political narrative, I guess, of the government, to say that not having a social security budget and not having an overarching budget would lead to institutional chaos. Now, in reality, it does bring more complexity, and you can expect financial markets to fret. You can expect EU partners to fret as well. But on the whole, even if the government is toppled, what could possibly happen is to basically take the 2024 budget, so the one that was adopted same time last year, and copy paste it for 2025. It's not ideal because it doesn't take into account new spending priorities that the government wanted to put in place. It doesn't take into account inflation. So ultimately, you can expect deficit levels to rise to a certain extent. And the 5% bar that's been set by the government for 2025 is probably not going to be met. But there will be a budget. And I think those that warn that this could lead to a government shutdown if there were no government are not exactly true to the reality of what could happen. But what's for certain is that there will be great political instability with no clear prime minister and government that could secure a majority in a very fragmented lower house. And that also leads to further economic insecurity and financial waves. So it's not exactly a straightforward road, but it's not chaos either.
And if this new government falls tomorrow, as many have predicted, are we looking at the nomination of a new prime minister?
Yeah, so it's the responsibility of the president to nominate a prime minister, and then together with the prime minister, they agree on a government and they agree on a number of ministers. So it will be down to Emmanuel Macron to find another prime minister, bearing in mind that finding Michel Barnier was a week, if not month-long struggle over the summer, and ultimately he didn't secure the majority that was needed to pass any bill, let alone that of budget. It will be very hard to find someone else who can secure a majority and even some kind of minority government with Macron's troops and the Conservatives. So that will be no easy task. And then there will be the second question of which ministers make it to this government, but ultimately that's influenced by who takes the lead and who will be the next and the new Michel Barnier.
And how does yet another French political crisis impact the European Union?
I think what we're seeing is a relative loss of influence by France in the European Union. It's true in the European Parliament, where Macron's troops have lost almost half of their members after the 2024 European elections. We see it in the European Council, where he sits with other heads of states and president, and where the political instability of the past few months is probably denting his credibility. And we see it also with the Commission, where Thierry Breton, who was France's first pick for commissioner, was kicked out, I think is the right term, by Ursula von der Leyen. Stéphane Séjourné, who's now the new French commissioner, probably has less influence and less reach over a number of key EU files. So there's been waning influence, and I think that just goes to reinforce it and to just speak to the political instability and how that might very much dent his credibility internationally. And you have to bear in mind also that Michel Barnier was a very respected EU figure. He knew everyone in Brussels, and in fact in most, if not all, EU capitals. So this was almost an asset that Macron could use to a certain extent to pass on some messages. And we saw that Michel Barnier was in Brussels a couple of weeks back to warn against the Mercosur deal. He was planning actually to go to Rome and meet with Giorgia Meloni later this week. If the government is toppled, that won't happen. But he had a conduit, Emmanuel Macron had a conduit through Michel Barnier to pass on key messages through someone who was actively and very respected, and he's losing that tool and that asset.
Thank you, Thèo.
Thank you.
I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our newsletters, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. Don't forget to leave us a star review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This podcast was produced by Miriam Sainz de Tejada, Charles Cohen, and I. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.